course, I grew up in a county school where basketball is the only sport back in the late 60s, early 70s. And probably thinking about basketball, I was probably about 10 years old when I guess my parents realized that I was going to be a basketball player, and I guess my dad told my mother that he has some potential and he can be developed into a good player. So I just started playing in the backyard, and it was a dirt court. I remember so many people would come over, kids my age would play, and dirt would just dust would be all in the air because we didn't have concrete and pavement then. It was just a wooden backboard, and I probably wore so many basketballs out through the years. But I just played in my backyard every afternoon, and kids would come over and play. And then because we didn't have elementary teams when I was in school up through the 6th grade. It was just when you got in the 7th grade, organized basketball started. And played on the 7th grade basketball team at 12 years old. And told my dad, he saw me play one game. My first basketball game was at Hurricane, or Harrican, however you want to pronounce it. And I played that day on a Thursday, and then he passed away that Saturday. So after that, I didn't have any kind of, because he was a really great basketball player, and they say the best to ever come through the state. But he played back in the 40s, and of course nobody knows about him now. And so I really didn't have any teaching from him. I just got his genes pretty much. He played in the late 40s at Macedonia School, and then I'm fixing to get mixed up in the storyline of where I just know that after he got out of school, he played semi-professional basketball, semi-pro ball, and then Northeast. I don't know if you've heard any stories about that. Northeast Junior College recruited him. They went to the national tournament, and they flew him up to play in the 2 games in the national tournament, the semifinals and finals, and he really wasn't a student there. And he played in those 2 games and scored like 80-something points. They got beat in the championship game. But then they said he was a summer school student the prior summer. But anyway, the story is that the Booneville newspaper turned Northeast in. It said Johnny Stroud was not a student at Northeast, and so it was a really big fiasco, or whatever the word you want to use for that. But that's what I remember reading stories about him. And then he played for the Whiskered Wizards. That was a professional basketball team, and all the players had beards. And they just played, they barnstormed all over the South playing basketball. Because the NBA hadn't started then. It was, in the 50s or whatever. So he was really on the cutting edge of all that. And so that's what I've heard about him. Of course, there's scrapbooks and all those stories about that. He passed away in my 7th grade, and then I just played basketball in the 7th grade and 8th grade. And my mother said that I need to stay back and mature a year, so I repeated the 8th grade, and that was probably I was one of the first kids to ever do that, and it helped me tremendously. A lot of times now, kids, they move their kids up into high school when they're in middle school. I had Jasmine Spears, here in New Albany recently. She played basketball at 8th grader, made All-State, but back then in the 70s, you didn't do that, and so I just repeated the 8th grade, and that really helped me. So I went in the 9th grade, I was an immediate starter. Of course, I was 6'5" in the 9th grade, and then when I got in the 10th grade, I was 6'7". So when you're at a little county school like West Union with 30 people in your class, and you're 6'7", you're pretty tall, and so I pretty much had to play basketball, and I developed really pretty fast. And even I had 3 coaches in high school. Charles Collier coached me the first 2 years, and then he resigned, and Cat Robbins, a name from from the past. He was coaching at Ole Miss as assistant coach, and he left Ole Miss and came to little old West Union to coach me. And he stayed 1 year, and then he went to Northwest Junior College, and Randy Hodges, who just got through playing at Mississippi State a couple years before that, came to West Union and coached me my senior year. So I was blessed with 3 coaches, especially the last two with Cat was a college coach, and Randy Hodges, who played college basketball. So both of those coaches helped me get developed to go into college. And but I had a great high school career. We won state championship and got beat in the finals another year. And so basketball I guess people say now it's big now, but it was really big back in the 70s because there wasn't anything else to do. There wasn't any social media. There wasn't really other sports. At West Union, we had basketball and had baseball for a couple of months in the spring, but that was it. No football. Nothing to do when you got home. So everybody just played basketball year round. And the crowds were huge, and you didn't have cable television, you didn't have cell phones and that sort of stuff. So what do you do? Play basketball. So I had a great high school career, and then that propelled me on into college. Well, the Nesbitt family lived across the road from me. There were about 4 or 5 Nesbitt brothers. One of the 2 of them would come every afternoon and play, and then another friend, Stanley Turner and Curtis Barkley, and then Dale and Gail Manning, and then some of my friends from West Union. If they're the Nesbitts and Turners and Gail and Dale could walk, but everybody else, that their parents have to bring them. But they would be from 2 people to 20 people in my backyard. I had a really good goal and basketball goal and a dirt court, and we'd play to dark, just basketball. And so it was good times, and that developed me by playing against. You don't see that nowadays, kids in the backyard. They may be shooting around 1 or 2 people, but not just groups of kids playing basketball. It wasn't a football, it wasn't a soccer ball, it was just basketball. And even when I came home from college, I would shoot out there a lot. My daddy was the first player in Mississippi ever to be All-State 4 years, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. And small world, but Randy Hodges, who coached me my senior year, was the only other player in Mississippi to be All-State 4 years, and he played at West Lauderdale. So my dad and my senior coach were the only 2 players. I was All-State 3 years. And then my mother, I believe, was All-State. I know my sister was. I went and saw her play in state tournaments. So I had a family of basketball. My mother's brother, James Wesley Busby, played at University of Alabama basketball. And his grandson was Eli Andy, who played at New Albany and played at Ole Miss. So it's been, on the Busby side of my family, it's been a lot of basketball. And then of course, my dad on the Stroud side was great basketball. So it was just the genes came together. Back when she played, it was 3-on-3. They would be 3, there were 6 on a team, and you had 3 defensive girls on one end, and your 3 offensive girls on the other end. So the other team had the ball, and your 3 were guarding those 3, and if they got a rebound, then they would dribble to the center line, and they could not cross center line. They'd have to pass it to their offensive 3 teammates, and then they would play 3-on-3. And then when someone scored a basket, the referees would take the ball to the center line, and the other team would put it in play 3-on-3 there. So that was all the way up into the 70s. That's the way it was played. And then they changed it to a rover, where 2 would stay back and the 4th one would cross the half court and play 4-on-4, and then they went into 5-on-5. So she was this defensive player on one end of the court, so she never played offense.
What did your uniforms look like when you were in high school?
Short. Shorts were about up to your, where you wear your boxer underwear. They were short. And I got my uniforms, jerseys retired at West Union. It's up on the wall, and it looked like about an 8-year-old kid could wear it. It's really tight. I mean, when we go out on the court, we was always trying to make it, bigger, and the shorts are up here, and you wear long white socks up to your knees. Everybody wore Converse shoes, and didn't have warm-ups to pullovers or travel tops. You just have your little jersey and your shorts, all you'd have. You'd order, 20 pair. They may order 10 mediums and 6 smalls and 4 larges, and somebody like me, really tall, they didn't, custom fit your clothes. So you had to wear the same number every year. I remember the coach would come in, he'd pour they'd wash the shorts and he'd pour the uniforms out on the floor, and everybody started running trying to grab the larges where they could fit. People would be left over with the small, and I had raw talent. Of course, I was given that gene to play basketball, and I was blessed with big hands. Probably when I played in college and pros, that was what coaches taught about me, my good hands. So I was blessed with hands, I was blessed with height, and I was blessed with basketball knowledge. That helped me later in coaching. A lot of players may just have the talent, but they don't have basketball sense. And the motivation, working hard, that comes along with it. High school, like at West Union, when you're 6'7" at a 1A school, you can show up and dominate. You don't have to exert yourself. And when I got into college to Ole Miss, then I had to really change and play harder and be more physical. That came later with better competition. But starting out, I was just blessed with the gift, and it took me as far as it could go, and then I had to really change and get tougher and stronger and meaner and that sort of thing. I didn't touch lift weights in high school at all. My first time I lifted weights was at Ole Miss, so I was a fragile little. I think I remember when I went to Ole Miss, I was 6'7", 195, and so I was really skinny. When I got into really good coaching in college, in the weight program and training program, and then I went to another level. Because some people may not believe it, but I averaged more points in college a game than I did in high school. So my junior year at Ole Miss, I averaged 27 points a game. In high school, maybe I would get 20 points a game. So I really went to another level in college, getting a whole lot better. East Union was our biggest competition in my last 3 years of high school. Potts Camp was really good during those years. So I'd say Potts Camp and East Union were the top two, and then Myrtle, my freshman year, was real good. As strong as Ingomar is now about dominating, they were just a little blip on our schedule back in those days. New Albany, it wasn't very good. Now they've been good, but while I played, they weren't. So, but the East Union had some really good players. They had the Coker brothers. They're both about 6'5", and they were good players. And so, and of course, when I got my senior year in high school, we started playing people out of state. That was the first for Mississippi. We had some schools from Alabama would come to West Union and play. And that's when the college coaches started coming in and scouting me and recruiting me when I was playing better competition. And then there would be college coaches there every night my junior and senior year from all over the country. But at first, it's wow, University of Kentucky's there, LSU is there, or Memphis State's there, and then they'd want to talk to you after the game, and you have to hang around. And then by the senior year, it got really old, and we'd get mail, and then the phone would ring, and then you just start avoiding it. My poor mother would have to talk to the college coaches, and or my sister would have to talk to them. I just kind of duck out. Because it's that same old thing. They want to say, how you doing? Are you interested in coming to Nebraska? Are you interested in going to West Virginia? Not really. I'm a homeboy. I want to stay close to home. And so then that coach would call, then his assistant would call, and then another assistant that same school would call, and it was just really, I probably got at one time I know there's like 300 something offers from from a Mill South to a Sanford to a Northeast to from small to major was recruiting. And then it got down to the four schools I visited were Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Alabama, and Vanderbilt. Mainly because of the coaches and their programs, and that's where I visited those four schools, and then chose Ole Miss.
They're all close to home.
They're all close to home. So my daddy died, my mother's living by herself. And it really came down, Mississippi State was recruiting me the hardest of everybody. They started recruiting me in the 10th grade. And they were really after me hard. And then, of course, when Randy Hodges coached me in my senior year, he played at Mississippi State. So it was really hard to tell them no. But it really came down to 30 miles from my house and then playing time. I could play quickly at Ole Miss when I started as a freshman. And at Mississippi State, I had to probably sit on the bench at least a year or maybe longer. So that's pretty much why I went to Ole Miss and made all these Mississippi State people in town mad because they were recruiting me hard too. Back then, the NCAA rules weren't as strict as they are now. But nowadays, alum can't call a prospect and say, well, you go play at my school. That's a violation. So, like, you couldn't call a good player at New Albany and say, why don't you go play baseball at Mississippi State? You're a state graduate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you couldn't do that now, but back then you could. My first year at West Union in 1972, and we had a couple of minority players on our team. The Nesbitt brothers I mentioned to you before, they lived right across the street from right across the highway, and Stanley Turner. They were probably the only black students at West Union, and they were my friends, so I played against them. And then, all the way through high school I did. And so that helped me a lot too, playing against athletes and good players, because we were kind of like the black families. We just I just play basketball. I didn't have a car or anything, and they didn't. And they'd come over and we'd play basketball, and we'd talk it up and shoot till dark, and that was the thing back then. And then James Green, who played Ingomar, who went on to Ole Miss and played, he was probably get ahead of myself, probably one of the first really good black basketball players in Union County. He graduated in '79 because he went on to Ole Miss and played. So I said Union County. New Albany maybe had something better than that, but we didn't really play New Albany much. But the schools were integrated then, and it helped me make me a better player. I'd go home at night or on weekends and watch basketball games on television. They didn't have the SEC network back then. There'd be one game a week every Saturday, and there'd be one NBA game every Sunday on television. Because growing up, we only had 3 channels. The 3 Memphis channels, 5, 3, and 13. We watched those 3 channels. So, but I studied it and watched it and read about it as much as I could. Well, Pistol Pete came through in the late 1960s, but you didn't hear about. You'd hear about him, but you just see him on TV once a week, or read about it in the newspaper, because there wasn't any Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. You couldn't get instant, gratification from seeing a highlight, so you would follow it. And then I probably followed the NBA players. Boston Celtics were my favorite team back then, and Bill Russell and John Havlicek and those players, and that's who I wanted to play for, was the Celtics, because they won all the championships back in the 60s and 70s. So, but not really a college player, because I didn't really identify with them. Ole Miss, Mississippi State weren't very good back in the early 70s when I was playing, so they weren't really great college players besides the Pistol Pete Maravich that you followed. When you go from a West Union where there were 30 in my senior class, a 1A school, back then it was a B school. High schools then were B, double B, A, and double A. Now they're 1A, 2A, 3A, 4A, 5, and 6A. So I was at the smallest school in the state going to an SEC school. So it was a big jump. So I get over there, and you're playing, you know, I always had a lot of juniors and seniors my first year, and they were 21, 22-year-old men. And here I'm a little old 18-year-old skinny boy from West Union. So it was a challenge at first, and my first game in college is the only game I never played in. We went to TCU and played out there, and I didn't get off the bench. And I remember coming back home, the assistant coach apologized, said, we're sorry we didn't get you in the game. We didn't think you were ready. So I played in the second game and scored like 12 points. And then on the fourth game of my freshman year, I started. And then I started the remaining 20-something games and every game the rest of my career. So, you know, I just developed quickly. I had good coaches, and, you know, I was just, the main thing is I had a really good coach in college, Bob Weltledge, who he came to Ole Miss the same time I went. I was his first signee. He came from the University of Indiana, and they had just won the national championship in 1976. And Bobby Knight, I mean, you might have heard of Bobby Knight, he was the head coach, and Coach Weltledge was the assistant coach. So Indiana basketball was the big name back then, and you're getting the top assistant from Indiana that's coming to Ole Miss. So he came into our house and just really swooned me and my mother and sister, you know, sharp, professional, and I was already thinking about going there, but then he closed the door, and that's where I went. And I remember one night, the phone rang, and Bobby Knight, the University of Indiana, called me, and I was outside playing ball. I think this is before Coach Weltledge came to visit with me, and Mother says, Bobby Knight is on the phone, wants to talk to you. I said, oh my gosh. So I ran to get the phone, and I thought he was calling me to recruit me to Indiana. But he started talking about Bob Weltledge, and you should play for this guy. So that sealed the deal. But he was a really hard-nosed coach, really not mean, but pretty bad coach. You know, real strict, real disciplinarian, and which I needed. And you know, we had lots of stories about him. Wouldn't feed us after games if we lost. We'd practice at 5 o'clock in the mornings after a game the night before. Just crazy things. We'd have practices without a basketball where we just do crazy stuff. So that's the kind of coach I needed to make me, you know, lots of players quit, of course. And if cell phones, we had those back then, the whole team would probably be boycotting because he was getting away with a lot of stuff that you don't do nowadays. I remember a story, we played at Vanderbilt one night, and we lost in overtime, and we get on the bus, and that was a Saturday night in Vanderbilt, and we're going to University of Kentucky to play on Monday night. So back then, everybody played Saturdays and Mondays, SEC. We get on the bus to go 4 hours to Lexington, and he stood up, and he said, if you guys aren't hungry enough to win, you're not hungry enough to eat. So we get on that bus and bus those 4 hours to Kentucky, and we hit a snowstorm in Lexington, and so we don't get to the hotel at 10 o'clock the next morning. We still hadn't eaten. And we'd go right to practice and practice and play the next night. And they were the number one team in the country. Of course, we're going to get beat really bad. So those are some of the stories that I have, but, you know, he developed me into a really good player. And he recruited some players like me that were really smart. Sean Toohey, I know you've heard of him, the Blind Side movie. And we played together, and he made me a good player. And so I had a knack for shooting. You know, I was probably one of the slowest guys on the floor, and I couldn't jump really high. But I had a knack for shooting and scoring. And a lot of times Coach Weltledge would say, you couldn't get away with this today either. He says, the only player who's going to shoot is Stroud. Anybody else shoots is coming out. So get him the ball. Well, I didn't like hearing that because other players started getting jealous and so I don't want to play. But so it just worked around that they'd screen, get me open, pass the ball, I would shoot and score. And I'd probably sometimes only shoot 12 or 15 times a game and still score 30 points because they were easy shots and I could shoot. but I played underneath the goal at Ole Miss, which everybody thinks I'm tall at 6'7", but I was playing against 6'11" and 7-footers. Nowadays a 6'7" guy plays point guard, plays a guard. But back then, late 70s, early 80s, I had to play underneath the goal. So I was playing against guys way bigger than me. But it worked out, and that's why led the SEC in scoring my junior year and led the SEC in scoring my senior year, because I could just shoot it, and I had the intangibles that a lot of players don't have. You never thought that a little guy from West Union would go and play in the NBA. Of course, that was my dream to play there. And when I got to be a junior in college, I went from like 17 points a game to 27. I jumped, and I led the league in scoring. This little 6'7" guy from Ole Miss is leading the Southeastern Conference in scoring. What's going on? So my senior year came in, and I went to the Pan American games, tryouts, and the World University games, and so I got exposed my summer of my senior year. And then my senior year, scouts just started coming, and well, of course you wouldn't know they were there. The New York Knicks would come in, or Lakers would come and watch the game, and they'd leave that you wouldn't know they were there. And so I had a good senior year. My numbers weren't as good as my junior year because more people were guarding me closer, and they know you got to stop Stroud. But I had a good senior year, and we went to the postseason tournament for the first time ever. We went to NIT. Now everybody wants to go to the NCAA tournament, the Sweet 16, the Final Fours. But back then, the National Invitational Tournament, NIT, was big too, and that was the first time since the 1930s that Ole Miss had gone to that tournament. So I had a good year, and I remember Coach Willett called me and said, you need to get an agent. I said, an agent? Little John Stroud needs an agent? He said, we need to get you an agent because you're probably going to get drafted. So we got an agent from New York, and he really, of course, the NBA was a little skeptical of my size at 6'7", playing underneath the goal, because when you go to the NBA, you got Kareem Jabbar, 7 foot, and Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, all those guys that are 6'9", 6'10". So they were a little skeptical of my size and quickness. But I was Houston Rockets' first pick in the 1980 draft. I was number 27. Graduated Ole Miss, and in education, I wanted to be a coach. So I graduated, and then I went to Ole Miss. I went to Rockets, and they shipped me out to Los Angeles. My first week out of college, they had the Los Angeles Summer League, and I stayed out there for 2 months and played summer ball against other rookies. And then I came back for the Rockets, and the very first week of the season, I got a bad case of the flu, and I missed 2 weeks of the season. And so when I come back, they put me on the injured reserve list. The story is, in 1980 and 1981, the teams could only have 11 players on the roster. You could have only 11 guys dressed out, and you could have 12 on your team. So when they put me on injured reserve, I was the 12th guy, so I could not get dressed out. So I come back, and I finally got to play, and I hurt my back somehow, and they put me back on injured reserve, and I stayed on there for about 40 games. So my rookie year, I had some really good games. My highest game in the pros was 12 points at Portland, or 13, I don't remember. Anyway, and I had some other good games. I got to play in the Boston Garden against Larry Bird. I got to play in the Forum in Los Angeles against Kareem Jabbar. But I ended up only playing like 15 games my rookie year. And so I come back my second year in that summer, and I kind of hit a plateau, or the team went another direction, and they just said bye-bye. They just waived me. That's called put you on waivers. They cut you. And they just cut me after my 1 year with the Rockets. I went to training camp my second year with the Rockets, but the NBA is so competitive. When you only have 22 teams, and you only have 12 players, so it's like 300 players in the United States are playing the NBA. It is really competitive, so they waved me by, I was ready to come back home anyway at 25 years old. And then I went over to, my agent said, you need to keep playing basketball. So we went to Spain then, and I played pro basketball in Europe for a year. And that was the experience. And basketball was easy over there. I averaged like 30 points a game. I could have been a great European player and played every 10 or 12 years because it was kind of like college over there. And but I was over there 1 year, and the language barrier, you never knew when you were going to get paid, and it was just ready to come home. So I came home after 1 year in Spain, and that was my playing career. You know, I regret not getting a chance to go back to the NBA because if there are 30 teams in the NBA now, and there's 15 players on a team, so there's 450 players on the NBA teams now, and I was playing like 150 less. So I could have played now and had a great NBA career, but it's just the time, that cycle, it's part of it. So that's kind of my playing career, you know. Then I got into all the coaching for 30-something years. But
Who was your super fan?
a guy named Ricky Price, and he still goes to games now. He's probably early 60s. Lord, if you interviewed him, y'all would talk for 10 hours about. He could tell you, he knows all the stories about everybody, every coach, every player. Knows stories about me that I've forgotten. See, I've forgotten, you know, with thousands of basketball games that I played and coached, you know, you forget about. Ricky'd come in here and say, you know, y'all beat Pine Grove in 1973, 64-62, and you hit a shot at the buzzer to win it. You know, I don't remember that. I mean, West Union was the school. Excuse me, I was 6'7", and my teammate Ronnie Childers was 6'5", and he was a guard, and he played ball at Southern Mississippi. He played at Northwest 2 years, and he went to USM and played. So we had two Division I players on the little West Union's team, and then I had teammates Dale and Gail Manning, Dale was 6'5", and Gail was big. So we were a really big team for a little bitty 1A school, and so everybody wanted to beat West Union. So we'd go into the county tournaments and the place they had been quit selling tickets, letting people in the game an hour before the game, and it was just packed, and people would be sitting on the floor, and we would get everybody's best shot. You know, they'd say, how in the world did Blue Mountain play West Union so close last night? Well, that was just, they wanted to play us, and we get everybody's best shots. But the games were electrifying. You know, there wasn't, WNAU radio was always there. Eric Snipes was calling the games. And the New Albany Gazette was only published, you know, once a week. And the Gazette was big back in the 70s because there wasn't, you know, of course, the social media. So Bill Cossett was there doing the stories, and Bill Rutledge, and so it was really big stuff. You only had two refs then, so there's going to be missing calls. And, you know, people would want to come and watch us play, and even the other team is like if I got 2 fouls in the first quarter, I'd have to come out of the game. And everybody wants to see John Stroud play. Even the other schools want to see me play. And the college coaches were recruiting me want to see me play. And I'm sitting over there with 2 fouls, and some little referee gave me a really cheap foul. And so it was hard on everybody, you know. So, but winning the county tournament then was nearly like winning the state championship because it was so competitive, girls and boys. Then we had I'm really going way back now, we had the Tallahatchie Conference, and there was 8 schools in it, and it was always played the first week in January, and it was a Tallahatchie, don't ask me the 8 schools were in it, but it was really big stuff too, the Tallahatchie Conference, the 4 county schools, Hickory Flat, Potts Count, Blue Mountain, Pine Grove, just basketball schools, nobody had football. When you go in the Memorial Gym, there's a picture up on the wall about a crowd back in the late 70s, early 80s. They need to get that picture here because there were like over 2,500 people in that gym. and you know how big the floor is, and they were on each end of the court. They were up there to the sidelines all the way around. Have you seen that picture? You may have noticed it, but you
I
always
have.
stare at it.
I have.
Sandra Panel is in that picture. She's playing in the game
Wow.
because we talked about it. I think it was, I don't know what year, 80, 81, 82, but that would be a great picture to show the crowds that were there. And you have fans knowing the game better than the official that comes in there. You know, back then they would send two hard-nosed referees that knew the game. If New Albany played Tupelo or something like that, or New Albany played Wheeler, was really good, and but it would be hard on the officials. I came back and coached at New Albany in 85, 86, and 87 once I left Spain. And Harvey Childers, the great Harvey Childers, in New Albany in 1985 had won the state championship, and they'd gone 36-0, one of the first teams ever to go through 4A and win it. And he left and went to Northeast Junior College to coach, and nobody wanted to take the job because follow Harvey Childers' undefeated season. And Johnny Payton, I don't know if you've heard of him, he was the great player on that team. He went to Ole Miss too. And I was assistant coach at University of Alabama that 84 season, and I was ready to come back home again, old homebody John. So I took that job, and everybody said, you're crazy for coming to New Albany in 1985 after they just won the state championship. And place was packed every night, and we won the state championship in 86, and then we won it again in 87. So I was the first coach ever in my first 2 years of coaching to win back-to-back state championships. And but then it was, crowds were like that then. It was just the same way. It was packed, and it was exciting. You love coaching in games like that, and the intensity of the players. Because New Albany was truly a basketball school during that time. You don't want to say that now because there's a lot of other sports are doing well, but the football players would run to basketball season. They couldn't wait to get there, play basketball, and we were really good. I was coaching boys, 3 years in boys, and then I left and went to East Mississippi Junior College because I wanted to get into the higher level. So I started off in junior college and 2 years down at Scuba, and then Millsaps hired me in Jackson, and I was there from 1990 to 2003, recruiting that level, and that was probably my best years of coaching was down there because you're at a high academic school and you don't have athletic scholarships to give the kid, but those kids want to play college basketball, so they'd run through the wall for you. So you had a high academic kid with a 30 ACT and just motivated to play, and kids from good families, and it was enjoyable, but it totally burned me out because recruiting is really hard there because the school is really expensive, and the kids would come and play for a year or two, and then they're pre-med majors and their grades were suffering, so they would just drop out of basketball. They'd stay in school, but they'd just go to school because they weren't losing a scholarship because they didn't have one in the first place. So I was always recruiting, and just burned me out. But we had some really good teams there. Went to the NCAA tournament several times. So after that, I came back home here in 2004 and bought the insurance agency. And then 1 year later, Dr. Garrett calls me, and you want to coach the girls. And 13 years of coaching girls. But mainly the reason was my two girls were coming through. I probably wouldn't have done it, but they were coming through. So I've had a really extensive basketball from playing SEC to playing the NBA, playing in Spain, coming back and coaching in junior college, coaching in Division III, coaching in high school, and coaching girls high school. So I've seen every level. Every level. So that's why I've forgotten a lot of these stories, coaching and playing. It's a lot harder to coach than to play because you're coaching, you got to deal with all your kids, you got to deal with the other team. Playing, you just have to worry about yourself, and you really enjoy playing, and you're gifted at it. So I was asked that question a lot. What's easier? Coaching is a lot harder. And that's why I had a little problem sometimes. I knew what to do, but how do you tell that person to do that? You know, coach can see two passes away. You know, if they'll throw it there, she's going to be open, it'll be a layup. But then how do you start practice and say, now, did you look over there and tell her to throw it there, or did you see that girl? And it's just... So a lot of coaches are better than they were when they're players, and usually that's the way. The great basketball players were never the great coaches. You think about it. Last couple of years in Albany, I coached middle school. Well, 7th graders just learning how to shoot a layup. And, you know, coaching college, you expected them to know how to do that. So getting down to another player's level and teaching them the basics, that was some issues I had trouble with. Because I was more advanced, and, you know, you coach in college, you expect them to throw behind the back pass or do that or do this. So coaching is to be admired. The really good coaches that win a lot, they can get down that level and teach. So it's hard. You know, there are 10 steps into shooting. You know, your elbows there, and you got to have wrinkles in your wrist, and you got to have space in your palm of your hand, and you got to have a window to see through, and you got fingertips and all that. Then you got to teach that to another kid, and they'll come out there and shoot like this. And 6 months from now, they're still doing that. So, you know.
Were you taught those things, or was that natural to you?
Well, I can tell you a story. It's a good story. Nobody's ever heard of this story before. When I played at Ole Miss, I scored like 2,000 and something points in college. And if you look on the SEC records, I was number 2 all time in points in the SEC, right behind Pistol Pete. And I had a fast release and I could shoot it. But when I get to the NBA, the coach there, Del Harris, doesn't like my shot. He says, you shoot the ball too low to play in the pros. Well, for 4 years in high school, I shot this way, and 4 years in college, I shot this way. He says, you need to shoot it way up here. And this was in the Los Angeles Summer League in July. And he says, all right, when camp starts in Houston in September, I need you to be shooting like this. So I went home those 2 months and had to change my shot that I'd done for 20 years. Of course, I learned how to do it because it was easy to do, but just shooting is the hardest thing in basketball. You got to just do it the perfect way. You know, people, you know, shoot their elbow out or shoot down here or whatever. So I had that was a story, and that probably hurt me in my pro career, changing my shot so late in my life. So a lot of times coaches will coach their same way every year for 20 years. We're going to run and gun down the court, shoot. And your players, you don't have the personnel to do that. You need to be a slow, methodical team. So that's what I faced in high school. I had to, several years, when Jasmine Spears played in that championship team of 2011, we throw her the ball, she turns and scores. It was easy. And then 3 or 4 years later, she's gone, and I got a 5'3" girl there. So you have to really change your coaching philosophy, and that's a challenge for a lot of coaches, especially in high school. But in college, you can go out, you have your style of play, you can go out and recruit, you kind of pick who you want, it fits your style, and you're successful. And so that's easier to do in college, but of course the player you want, everybody else wants that player too. And then when you ain't got a scholarship to give them, you don't get them.
Yeah.
Their parents are paying $30,000 a year for their education, and they're over in San Antonio, Texas, playing a basketball game on a Sunday afternoon, and they got a chemistry test on Monday back at school. So after a couple of years of that, they said, I've got to give it up, Coach, even though I love to play. So then you really got to get those student athletes, as we call them, that will stay there with you for 4 years. And you're disciplined enough to do it. And of course, if you're playing in college, you're probably not going to quit. And when we got my last couple of years, we started playing Division I schools we got pretty good. And those Division I schools will they're called buy games. They'll pay you $5,000 to come in here and they'll get a win. So we went down to Southern Mississippi and played them my last year, and they paid us $10,000, but they got a 30-point win. So the schools have that kind of money to throw out. And what happened in our case there, I had 3 or 4 Division II players, and marginally I had 2 that should have been playing Division I that came to Millsaps. So we'll go down and play Southern Mississippi, and we're tied with them at halftime. And their coach is just having a fit down there, and he got some calls late in the game. They ended up beating us like 8 points, but that was a hard win for them. He came back and said, we're not going to play you guys ever again. But that was just one of those stories that I was good that year. Next year, we went to Northeast Louisiana and Monroe and played over there, and we got beat like 100-60. So
Okay.
I don't want to brag myself on that Coach of the Year.
Okay.
But I did it in college at Millsaps like 3 times, in New Albany twice, in the 80s. I had two stints in New Albany, in the 80s for 3 years, and then the 13 with the girls. So I don't know, probably 7 or 8 times total through my career. Coach of the Year is kind of popularity. If your team wins the conference, sometimes they give the coach. They won the league, so we'll let him be the Coach of the Year. I was SEC Athlete of the Year in my senior year, so I was real proud of that honor, because you're competing against the other 10 schools in the league and their players, and that's voted on by the coaches.
Is that across the board or specific to basketball?
That's every sport has their Player of the Year. I remember they sent me a trophy, and it is tall as this. It's about 8 foot high, and I never put it together. Still in a box. Well, I said, we're not going to put that together. It was, anyway. I was at Millsaps 13 years, and in New Albany with the girls 13 years, and 3 years at New Albany with the boys in the 80s, and 2 years at Scuba. So it's 31 total. But the 13 years at New Albany coaching girls is something I love doing. I enjoyed the basketball, at Millsaps, putting a team together and winning. But with the girls, you have a lot more camaraderie, you have a lot more closeness, you have a lot more chemistry. And then 8 out of the 13, I had my daughters playing. So it was I'm glad I did it. I had some opportunities to leave and go coach other places during that time, but I wanted to work with Caroline and Anna Francis, and even though they weren't great players, Caroline loved it more than any person ever. She wanted to be a WNBA player, but she didn't have the skills to do it. But she had the motivation, and she would work and work and work, but she just didn't have the skills. And of course, she got caught on probably the best 3 years of New Albany girls basketball ever. All those girls were in her class. And then, so winning a state championship with them was unbelievable. And then when Anna Francis came along, she was, 5'11", 6 foot, and she had some basketball skills, but she wasn't motivated by basketball. She'd rather hit the art world. But she played because I was a coach, and I played, and her sister played, and her grandmother played. And, she had offered to play at Millsaps and some other small colleges, because she had big hands, and she's a little bit like me. She was slow, but she had some basketball skills. So it's just kind of funny that you have 2 daughters, and one wants to play and one doesn't, but the one that doesn't play is a little bit better. So those were great years, though, and good relationships we built, and wouldn't take anything for them. When I played, there was no shot clock in college. Now there's a 30-second shot clock. When I played in the late 70s, there was, when you got the ball, you could hold it for 5 minutes. There was no shot clock, and there was no 3-point shot in college. So somebody could shoot a 30-foot shot, and it would only count 2 points. So that hurt in the career I had. If I'd have had those 2 things, I would have had a lot more points scored, because more shots would have been taken because the game is faster. You got to shoot every 30 seconds. Sometimes we'd hold the ball 2 minutes before we'd shoot. And then a lot of times I shot 3-point shots now, but then they only counted 2. So those are the 2 biggest things in again basketball has changed is the shot clock and the 3-point shot for sure, because it's really changed. And then, as I said earlier, repeating it, but there's just so many more things. Union County now, there's kids, their time goes lots of places, and they just don't focus on one skill anymore. Their parents may want them to play lots of different things, or they play because their friends are playing. I'm going to play soccer, and then I'm going to go play tennis, and I'm going to be a cheerleader, and they're not good at anything. Where in the past we just focused on, we just had basketball. Basketball, especially girls, you got volleyball in the fall, which is hurt girls basketball some, and then you got soccer right in the middle of the winter. Those poor kids playing soccer when it's 20 degrees, right against basketball. So that's probably hurt girls basketball at a lot of schools more than anything is soccer being played in the winter. You go to college, soccer's played in the fall, and volleyball is played in the fall. You get a good girls volleyball player that could be an excellent basketball player too, but she may get a scholarship to play volleyball. She's going to not play basketball. So it's hard at the smaller schools to share.
Once you retired from coaching, did you have withdrawal?
Sure. I still get a pad out and I watch a game last night and start drawing a little play up on just a little scratch, pass and cut and backstream there and reverse the ball. And so, but it's helped me in these last 3 years that I've done radio and television games for Ole Miss. I did do some radio games, and those are a lot easier than the TV games. But TV games, I was a color guy. I just talk about the play. So that's helped me stay involved in the basketball part. Between Millsaps and high school girls here in New Albany, one year I officiated back in 2005 for 4. I refereed 1 year. And that made you appreciate referees a lot more. Because all my years at Millsaps, I was coaching. I said, whenever I get out of coaching and I retire, I'm going to go be a referee because I can do a lot better job than these guys are doing. I always say that. And then I moved up here and I was selling insurance, and I said, I'm just going to go be a referee. And it's so hard, so much harder than it looks, especially in basketball, because it's just, football, you may miss a call, but there's a minute before you know the play. Or baseball, there's a pitch and you wait a while. Basketball, man, there's so many things that happen at one possession. You shoot, you rebound, you pass, you turn it over, you foul. So that got me. When I went back into coaching with the girls, I appreciated the referees because they have a hard job, but I would still get technical fouls. I still got on the referees after that. After all, I guess when you know the game so well, and then you see someone come in and officiate that's selling insurance all day or being at a bank all day, and they come on the court and referee and they're not seeing it and they miss calls, that's what would bother me a lot. That's what bothers lots of college coaches, because that's all they need to do. That's not their full-time job. So they're not at practice every day, and they don't see those moves, and they don't see, it's just, and they miss calls, a lot of missed calls. And you work all week on that one game. It's like football. You work all week practicing that play, and then you get that Saturday afternoon football game, and you have an official that's been doing loans all week at a bank, and he misses that call, and it costs you the game, and it costs him the coach maybe his job. So, officials have it really hard. Of course, the NBA and NFL, those guys are full-time. They don't do anything else. Anyway, I did that 1 year. So I mentioned I've been at all levels of basketball. I forgot about that 1 year refereeing. I was player of the year in the SEC against guys at Kentucky and Alabama. They're playing the NBA, and I get up there, the same type players, I'm against them, but you know, it's just a different coach, and your teammates won't pass you the ball like they did in college, and it's just, you know, everybody's heard of Larry Bird. I guarded Larry Bird in Boston one night, and guarded him. That's probably my biggest highlight, playing the Boston Garden. Boston Garden is like what do you call it, like a Yankee Stadium or something, the Boston Garden, and so yeah, it's just funny how it worked out. I was a great college player, and is a below average pro player. It's funny, people don't understand why that could happen. But I said, well, it's just different window. I went to the wrong team, you know. If Phoenix or Utah or Minnesota would draft me, it could have been totally different. But you never know. Just play what you dealt with. And the average life of an NBA player is like 2.3 years, because there's so many coming in out of college every year, and you get a year too old, and they get rid of you.